Last week we kind of did a Daniel overview, and we're going to dive into some specifics tonight. And as we talked about the whole book of Daniel last week, we talked about how the book was intended to encourage people to continue being faithful to God and to feel hope, to be reminded of reasons to hope, even in the face of hardship and injustice and just wrongness out in the world and suffering. The book, like we said last week, promises that one day all the kingdoms of the world and all of the hard things that they put people through, they will eventually fade away and only God's kingdom will remain. That's like the ultimate message, take-home message of the book of Daniel. And last week we talked about how there's a lot of stuff going on in this one book, a lot of different kinds of things going on in this one book. We said the first half of the book, like the first 6 chapters, are stories about Daniel and his friends and what their life was like in exile in Babylon and Persia. And then the second half of the book, the last 6 chapters, are different types of prophecies and visions. So, we're going to read different ones of those from a few different sections, and we're going to think about what was the message of this story or vision to Daniel's original readers, and what can be the message for us today. And as you read, I would suggest like checking the timeline first, and maybe even checking the questions first before you jump into the passages that I will give you. And we said last week that the entire book of Daniel was finally collected and written down, kind of put pen to paper, as it were, in about the year 160 BC. That the original stories and the original person of Daniel started taking place around 600 BC or so, about 594 to be exact. And the whole book was collected and written down a couple of centuries later in about 160. So be thinking, what were those original readers going through? Okay, so I've got 3 passages here. So I'm going to divide up the place into 3 groups. Let's see. I'm going to have to make it somewhat amorphous. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to go people in the chairs, and this table with the spivies are going to be group number 1. And you can read it on your own and or with the rest of your group members if you'd like. And then, let's see, this table in the middle is going to be group number 2. And then this table to the side is going to be group and passage number 3. So everybody in the chairs, and that table is group passage number 1. This table is group passage number 2. And this one is group passage number 3. So let me give you your assignments with the questions to help guide your reading, and maybe even look at the questions first to kind of get your heads situated for what to look for. There you go. There we go. And I will pause the video and I will share online the passages and the questions so that folks who are watching from home can pause it here and read and think while they do in here. hearing what you all came up with on how your chapters could have helped Daniel's original readers and how it can speak to us today. So let's go to group one over here. They had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into the fiery furnace. So group one, what message might that story have had for the Jews who were reading it later, experiencing persecution?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's a similar kind of answer for all three of these questions, in that in times of trial and tribulation, that God is with you, and that you must keep your focus on the hereafter, and ultimately you will answer to, even in the face of death.
Oh, good, to help kind of expand their vision so that they don't just focus on the bad that's here and now, but kind of have God's more like eternal perspective in mind to give them hope and to get through. Yeah. Let's see, any other thoughts, group one, about your passage and questions? Yeah.
There's the strength that one of them showed when when the power to be said you were going to be put into the fire if you don't bow. He simply said, I know you have this power, I know you can burn us alive, and our God will save us. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to do it. And that's the point of strength that is worthy of notation. And people in the future can say, wait a minute, even if the bad guys can get to you, don't give in. Do not let the bad guy win. John F. Kennedy made a statement that the only thing to stop the bad guys from getting things done their way is for the good people to sit back and do nothing. And so this guy, whichever one of it was, showed a tremendous amount of inner strength by saying, look, you do what you please. Our God will save us, but even if you don't, we're still not going to do it.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most amazing verses in that story, and it doesn't often get covered like when we teach it to kids, like Sunday school or vacation Bible school. But what Ray was saying is that when the king in chapter 3 was Nebuchadnezzar, and he said he would throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace because they wouldn't bow down to the king's idols. One of them said, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold. And that's just an amazing thing to say. God can save us from this. Even if God does not, we're going to do the right thing, and we're not going to give up. And that is so powerful, because we all know people that we have prayed for, maybe even ourselves, our family members, and what we had hoped would happen ended up not happening. And yet, you all are still here today trying to follow God's guidance in your lives. And I think that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were doing and saying. That we have faith in God, that God will save us. They might not have even known what the saving would entail, but they knew that God was powerful enough to keep the flames from consuming them. Yet they said, even if God doesn't do that, we're still not going to do the wrong thing. And that is just amazing. That verse always stands out. All right, group two, they had Daniel in the lion's den. So group two, what did you all come up with for the answers to your questions?
Virtually the same thing.
Very much similar. On all of our questions kind of have the same answer in a variety too. But Daniel was faced with people who were seeking to find something wrong with him. He continued to stay faithful, so they had to make up something. They had to create a situation But I don't find anywhere in here that he spoke evil against them, that he tried to get back at them in any way. He just focused on remaining true to God. And I think the lesson is steadfastness in your faith ultimately pays off in the long run.
Yeah.
As difficult as things may be at times, if you can just hold on to that strength and that faith, then God will see you through it.
Yeah, that's why Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, because these ne'er-do-wells, like the bad guys in that story, they were jealous of how well Daniel was doing, kind of politically in his job, and they tried to trip him up, but they couldn't find anything bad that was factual and true to accuse him of. So they engineered this scheme so that Daniel would then get thrown into the lion's den. But God protected Daniel because he stayed true to kind of not lowering himself to their level, but always following God's guidance, trying to do the right thing, trying to be the best person he could be. And that's why this story is so powerful, because he could have taken the easy way out and just stooped down to their level of being deceitful or lying or trying to play the political game of going behind or under the table or using false accusations like they were trying to do, but he doesn't. And God was with him the whole time. So a good message for those original readers and for us, when we might see and hear a lot or be surrounded by people, maybe in our community or our workplace, like Daniel's workplace, that are trying to be deceitful and underhanded because they're jealous or they don't like us. And it's always tempting to stoop to their level of immaturity and childishness. But God will be with us if we can keep walking the path of righteousness. So a good encouragement. Okay, group 3 had the funky passage of a pretty wild prophecy. And
Okay.
it was, yes, so group 3,
Just to
what do you have?
recap chapter A, Daniel had a vision, and in that vision, there was a ram, and the ram was strong, but then along came a goat with horns everywhere, and the ram had no strength at all. He was powerless under the goat. And Daniel was worn out. But anyway, an angel came to Daniel. Daniel asked, please explain to me this vision. And so Gabriel, the angel, tells him, and I'm assuming it's Antichrist, is that the way you pronounce him?
Yes, Antiochus was an evil king.
Yes.
At the time.
Yes, and it was talking, in the interpretation of the vision, he was talking about how the two-horned ram actually represented the kings of Persia and Media. And so Antiochus, I can't say it, Antiochus.
Yep.
Was who the dream was about, and he was going to become very powerful, but not by his own strength, but I guess God. And then he is going to be knocked out. He's just going to be done. And so his power will mean nothing in the end. I'm assuming that's the way it read to me. And that God took over, even though this vision was horrifying to him and the Jews that even read this, I assume. But in the end, Daniel had been asleep for several days, but when he woke up, God assured him that he would take care of everything. Is that halfway right?
I think that's 100% right.
Oh.
I think, come on, even Daniel says he didn't understand what he was seeing in this chapter. So yes, I think you all are spot on. That he's got this funky vision of animals that they considered strong and powerful, like strong ram, goats with horns on them. Horns are always thought to be strength, symbols of strength. And yet, even though these strong rams, strong goats with horns, they look and they are powerful, they have a lot of strength, eventually they get overcome or defeated, or their horns fall off, or they start stomping around, breaking everything, but eventually they die out and they are no more. And the angel Gabriel says, these are like all the kingdoms of the world and the empires. And if you look on that Daniel timeline handout that I gave you, chapter 8 tracks those events with Media and Persia, and then Alexander the Great with the Greece Empire, and then when he died, then other people, blah, 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 broke up. So that's what chapter 8 is tracking. And it's saying that these forces that do have power now, they're not going to last. And it's a freaky thing for Daniel to see in that chapter. And it's a weird thing for us to read in this chapter. And when we are surrounded by chaos and bullies and the strength of earthly empires, we get freaked out too. But this chapter, what's the ultimate message of this chapter, group 3?
Go ahead.
To me, we see it in all of this, is being persistent in your faith. Yes, God is in control. Things do happen. Bad things happen. But don't give up. Hang in there, common language, and believe, and don't let your faith waver, that things will work out okay, even in midst of hard times, tragedy, whatever. To me, that's sort of the thread I see running through it.
Yeah.
In all of this.
Me too.
Yeah. And in both vision and then in what really happened, as you see on the timeline, it was really bad stuff. It was persecution and oppression and suffering. But that chapter specifically in Daniel and the whole book is trying to remind people this is bad and it's scary stuff. And that is true. But just remember, this doesn't last forever. The kingdoms of the world won't last forever. But God will. And God is over all of it. And I think as we conclude our quick read through of the Old Testament, that is a great message to end with. Because the Old Testament spans a whole long period of time. It starts with stories about the creation event itself. And even when you look at the time period of when the Old Testament books were written down, even that time period is about 1,000 years long from when some of the earliest books of the Old Testament were written down, and then Daniel, one of the last ones, was written down. That's about 1,000 years time span. Think of how much has changed in our world the past 1,000 years. So this is a big span of time in the Old Testament. A lot of things have gone on, and the Old Testament tried to help people have that big picture perspective, like we've been talking about, through things like stories, books of the Old Testament. Some were stories, some were hymns and poems, and just to help people kind of step out of their immediate understanding of how hard the world is, and kind of step out and see this bigger, broader picture. Because it's so easy for us today to get bogged down with what's going on today and how hard it is. But the whole Old Testament tries to help us step back and see this broader picture of what God is trying to do in the world, even in spite of the humans who claim to be following God. And that's like a running theme of the Old Testament. The people who claim to be following God, the people of Israel, just keep making mistakes and bad decisions, just right and left, turn after turn. And yet, the testimony of the Old Testament is that God didn't abandon them, even though they might have deserved it, but that God was always with them and working on them when bad stuff would happen to them from the outside, or when bad stuff would happen because of their own bad choices. And a good thing for us to remember today, when things happen to us that we didn't see coming, that's hard. When we make bad choices and bad decisions that have consequences, through it all, God is with us and will not abandon us, and all of that is temporary. And we talked about it a little bit last week, that the Old Testament does a good job of kind of looking at the smaller picture and helping us see this is what God's bigger picture is doing in this moment, like the story of Job or Esther or the Exodus. God's bigger picture of work, here's how you can see it played out. So, as you read Old Testament verses in the future, think about that, and think about each passage and story as a small example of that bigger message of God's presence and support in human lives. So, we will conclude our Old Testament study there, and next week we'll have a special service to kick off the season of Lent and help us get ready for Easter. So, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.